I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, you guys. It's not fun. All right, welcome on Facebook and on YouTube. We have a heavy hitter topic today. We are talking, is homeschooling under attack and or being threatened right now? This is a big topic, and I actually have a report, a very specific report. We're not just talking general news today. We are talking about a specific report that recently came out that if you have not heard about, I think you need to know about. I think that homeschoolers need to be aware of some of the issues that are facing us, some of the things that are in the future, and some of the risks, and also know how to better protect ourselves and our families and our rights and our freedoms. So this is an education episode for us as educators. All right. So grab yourself something hot to drink. I have some peppermint tea. I'm going to make sure I have my comments open in all of the different places. I also have my notes I have to try to see on the same screen. So we're going to see how this goes. If you know anyone who homeschools, who needs to be aware of some of this important news, I would recommend hitting the share button and letting them know about this one, because they are going to want to be aware of this report. If you are over on Facebook or on YouTube, you will see that there is a QR code on the screen. I am also going to post in the comments so you guys can see, and on the app, we're going to post in the comments. I want you guys to have the link of this report, and you can save this link. You can access this link. You can actually download this report. It is a full 40-something page report that I'm going to walk you through today. So if you don't have time to sit and read all of the details, it's okay. I'm going to give you the rundown, the most important things you need to be aware of. I've got some quotes and some stats from it, and we're going to have a conversation around it. So it's a great opportunity to just get to hear even what other homeschoolers have to say about some of these things. And so it makes it a fascinating topic. We can also share this, you guys, on our Facebook group if we have that open as well over on Facebook. All right, let's get started. The title of the report, if you haven't heard of it, is Homeschooling Through a Human Rights Lens. And specifically, it is from UNESCO. It just came out in September of this year, so it's relatively new. And basically, it talks about the growing movement of homeschooling, which is exciting, right? Homeschooling is growing, and as it's growing, it gets more attention from politicians, from the government, and from the general public as people start to ask questions about why, first of all, it's growing, and what are the reasons, as well as, of course, as is the case with the world we live in today, isolating very specific circumstances or negative situations that happen, that hit the news, and using those things as indicators as to why it should not be growing or why it is concerning. And so we're going to be talking about all of that. Basically, the big picture of this report is that we're talking about the fact that they are claiming that this is a human rights issue, that our kids have rights. And quite frankly, they do. Every human being has rights, right? We know that. And so they are tying together this idea of our children having rights and basically saying that there is or could be potentially a conflict with our rights as parents and with their rights as children. And so that's the premise of this article. That is what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to break it down point by point. So hopefully you guys have it open. If you were able to open it up on your screen, I do have some questions I'm going to be sharing as well in both places. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation where you guys will get to participate in it. But let's talk about why they are concerned. So the first thing that we mentioned from the very beginning is that homeschooling is increasing, and that's great. What they're concerned about, and the first concern that they kind of bring up, is the fact that the data is largely unknown. So they say, you know, it's growing, but the biggest concern is that it's like a gray area in the world of education. We don't really know what's happening. We're not really seeing the statistics or reports that we need to see to really evaluate how this is going, to see the individual rights and freedoms of every single child in these situations? How can we control or oversee or approve these things if we are not intricately involved in these things? And it goes as simply as a fact that is becoming a much wider spread phenomenon. It used to be a much smaller movement, and it is a growing movement, as all of us can attest to. And they say that the data is not accurate or even available. And part of that is because there are parents that avoid reporting, or maybe in your state or in your province or country or wherever you live, you may not even be required to report. So if you're not required to report, we don't have those statistics in order to even build a framework around. This means that there's actually question marks around how many people are homeschooling. They don't actually accurately know the number because not everywhere accurately requires people to report it. Basically, the stats from the report that we have at this point is that in the United States, pre-pandemic, homeschooling was at a record high at that point of about 2.8%. So 2.8% of people were homeschooling before the pandemic. Obviously, everything changed with COVID-19. And I think a large part of that was because a lot of us got to see the curriculum that our kids were doing. We got to see the stuff being sent home. We got to see the kind of classes that were happening. Parents started to feel like some of them were homeschooling their own kids already because they were being sent home the homework and being told to do it. And they realized, hey, I actually think I could do this. And others were deeply dissatisfied with what they were seeing in the school environment, with the kind of curriculum that was being taught, the content. And so it really propelled the homeschool movement forward. So in 2023, 2024, that number, that percentage point in the United States went from 2.8% to 6%. We are talking about over doubling. And the reality is we actually don't know. That number could be much higher because, again, not everybody is required to report or does report about the fact that they are homeschooling. So that gives us a little bit of a gray area where we actually don't know how big of a movement this is. In the UK, there is 111,700 families who homeschooled their children. And I believe this is based on that 2023-2024 school year. In Canada, it was 50,000. In Australia, it was around 30,000. In France, around 30,000. And so they're getting all of these reports, and they're starting to realize this is a growing worldwide phenomenon. It is not going away. If anything, it is a growing movement. And because it's a growing movement, we need to have our attention on it because we need to figure out why this is happening. And we also need to figure out what kind of control and what kind of protection we have over kids when they are essentially out of our clutches. And so we have no oversight or ability to even say what is happening to be able to protect their rights and their freedoms. So that is their point number one. And as with anything, you guys, we can take extremes on this. We can take it from one angle to another angle. And I know that there are all sorts of opinions probably fluctuating even right now about that, and that idea of somebody saying, that it should be in their clutches is really the first concern. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think we can all agree that every individual, including our children, have rights and they do have freedoms. And yes, those things do need to be protected. I believe that every person, every individual, whether they are unborn all the way through, that they have a right to life. I believe that they have, a right to not having violence or abuse toward them, right? So we have rights and freedoms. This is a true thing. And so while it may make us uncomfortable, and we're going to talk about the extremes on both sides of this, I think we can acknowledge the fact that we do want to care. As parents, we want to care. As society, we do want to care about this. We want to care about our children. We want to care about their future. And so that is the first point that is made in this article or report, as you would call it. Okay, so here is my first question for you, because I told you this was going to be a conversation. I'm going to show it on the screen over on YouTube and Facebook. And for those of you on the app, I'm just going to ask you, how many of you report that you homeschool? And again, this may not be required for you. So maybe you're like, I don't. You can go ahead and post this in the comments. But maybe you don't have to report on this. And so maybe this isn't something that has really come up. You may not have accurate statistics, because even in your region, of how many people are homeschooling, because you are not required to report. But let's hear it from you guys as homeschool families. Are you reporting? Is this something that you have to just say you are homeschooling? Is there more that you have to do? Is there a permission process that you have to go through? I think part of the joy of having a conversation like this is not just that you guys get to learn or hear about something that is actually happening that impacts you, but you can see what other parents are saying based on the states or provinces that they are located in, which is going to give you a much larger view than just hearing an individual report. So, all right, I see a couple of you guys saying that you're required to report in your state. You have to do a declaration of intent. Over here on Facebook, YouTube, I see I don't report. It's not required in Texas. I see yes. And so I'm seeing I've got some you have to report, some are attendance only, some are just a declaration of intent. So basically you are saying that you intend to homeschool, but you're not having any more oversight after that. So again, it really does depend, right, where you live, and that can vary. So when we're talking about country oversight, it's really just not specific enough. We have to be going deeper into individual states and into individual provinces, because each region is unique in what they require of their individuals. In South Carolina, we have to register with an accountability group that is independent of the school system. In Ontario, it is a letter of intent. All right, so this hopefully gives you guys, hopefully you're able to see some of the conversation that's happening in the comments, which will give you a bit of an idea of what things are like in individual areas. Okay, that was question one. I'll let you guys keep commenting while I move on to point number 2 in this UNESCO report. So the main idea and the big picture that we talked about already is specifically that education is one of the human rights, that everyone has a right for and to education. It is an individual right, but I think more specifically what this report is talking about is not just that it is an individual right, but rather that it is a societal obligation. Meaning, basically, you can choose to homeschool your kids, but the state should be overseeing it, because education serves society, not just family. And here's a direct quote from it. It says, "Safeguarding the right to education in every setting remains a core responsibility of the state." And so this brings us to question number 2, which I'm going to put up on the screen. And I think that this is a very legitimate question right now. Is education the responsibility of the government or of the parent? And so I would love to hear you guys answer that in the app, in the comments, on YouTube, on Facebook, wherever you are joining in from. What do you think about this? This is an important question to ask. This is an important question to talk about with your spouse. It's an important question even to have with your kids. What do you ultimately believe about education? I would say that I believe that education, biblically speaking, historically speaking, was the responsibility of the parents. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go. And I believe that we were to raise and teach and disciple our children. And I think that the idea of school and of education and of bringing people together in, one larger facility came from a good-hearted intention. I think that there were people who were uneducated, who didn't feel like they had the ability. They didn't read, they didn't write. They needed a teacher who could read and write to teach their kids to feel like they would have more potential and more opportunities. I understand where it came from, and I think that we all have to give the allowance of the fact of where it came from. But along the way, as we as parents, I would argue, abdicated our right, it did become the responsibility, whether we like it or we don't like it. It was given as a responsibility to the state or to the government. And so I think there's a lot of parents that don't like where that is right now. And we're trying to take back what we see as our God-given right to educate our children. But the reason that we are in the position that we're in right now, where there's so much debate and where so many people are even calling that into question, is because I would argue for a large period of time, we as parents, society-wise, not obviously us individually, but we abdicated that right and we gave it up. And so now, it's a battle. It is always easier or maybe I'll reframe that. It is harder to take back ground that has been lost. And I see education as ground that was lost, that we are fighting to regain and take back. And I think that that is such an uphill battle, and it is so much harder than being able to maintain the rights and freedoms that we have. And so part of what I want to be able to talk about today is, okay, we have our current rights and freedoms, and that may vary individually by state or by province. And the question at this point is, how can we maintain our current rights and freedoms that have been long and hard fought for by organizations such as the HSLDA, by individuals who argued and fought and went to court, and these incredible cases that earned us the freedoms that we have in our various states and provinces. How can we maintain that now? And how does this ideology or this big picture viewpoint of homeschooling risk that or put that under threat, as I will put it? So, okay, you guys there's comments. There's so many comments. I feel like I just want to sit and read through all of these. Education is the responsibility of the parents. Some stats say that parents send their kids to school only have maybe 35 minutes a week of face-to-face uninterrupted time. I think accessibility to education is a responsibility the government should steward, making it available to all and partnering with parents to make it an achievable asset. But the weight of education and nurture in education is the responsibility of the parents. It's very interesting. And I will say that this report, I mean, I'm picking out the main things that are a concern from us as homeschoolers, but I will say that they do mention, even one of the things they say, education is a collective act of co-creation. So they're not necessarily saying that the parent has no part to play whatsoever, but they definitely don't want to relinquish any of the piece of control or the fact that state should have oversight. And so I think that we're in this tug of war for if we as parents decide that we want to home educate our children, we want freedom and the flexibility to be able to do that without the oversight and control. And I would argue that the other side is saying they want ultimate oversight and control, but we will let you if you fit within the box that we tell you or the parameters that we set for you. So, all right, you guys are making some great comments. Highly recommend you read through these because there is a lot of great stuff in there. All right, let's go on to another point in this report. UNESCO frames parental rights as not absolute. This is something that recurs throughout the report. If you continue reading it, it says that parents have educational freedom, but only within limits that are set by the state. So here's a couple of quotes from it. This right, specifically speaking to parental freedom, is not absolute. Homeschooling must not weaken children's access to rights. Parental liberty exists only if education meets minimum educational standards laid down or approved by, this is the word that gets us, you guys, competent authorities. All right, we're not just talking about authorities, we're talking about competent authorities, which I guess really leads us to the idea that what you're ultimately saying here is that we are not competent. So only someone who is competent, only someone who is authorized, only someone who is been put in a position of authority has the right to decide what those standards are, which is a challenging point. And this is one that I struggle with a little bit. This brings us to question number 3. Should the standard be curriculum and content-based, or should it be skill-based? So you guys have heard me talk about this before if you followed me for any length of time back in my homeschool on days or over here on Gather Round. I talk about this arbitrary line of what is normal, the standards that the education system has set up based on testing, based on standardized testing to basically decide what is normal. And so kids, of course, are testing really high and above average. Kids are testing very low and below average. And a line is drawn in the middle that determines what the standard is, what kids need to know at what different grades based on how performance is. So this isn't necessarily what we feel like is the most important things for kids to know. We are talking about specific things, specific milestones or information that has to be assimilated or gained or understood by certain ages. So we're not necessarily saying every kid has a right to read, a right to write, a right to be able to do basic arithmetic. We are saying that your kids need to learn this and this and this and this. And the problem that this brings is that, of course, whoever is deciding what the curriculum is, whoever is deciding what that content is, they're ultimately making those decisions on what our kids are taught. So we're not talking about how they're taught. We're not talking about the skills that they're being taught. We're talking about information, how that information is being presented. And I would say that this is a major, to me, perhaps one of the biggest concerns that I have with this report is that we're talking about somebody deciding what information. And if you guys some of you have seen when your kids were being sent home with COVID, you saw the curriculum, you saw some of the things that were being taught. Some of you live in areas where maybe you have a smaller school and there is not as much that's going on. Things still feel like they're in line with your values, but there is a lot of places where there is a lot of ideologies. There is a lot of theories that are being taught as fact. And this goes far beyond grade school. This goes far beyond K through 12. This is something that is being faced in colleges and in universities. There is a lot of information that is taught as fact, specifically to steer our kids into one direction. Someone is deciding what that information is. Someone is deciding what has to be taught in order for them to say that they've met their fundamental rights to an education. And if that person is not us, if we're not doing it based on skill, if we're doing it based on that curriculum per se, then that is a major, major point of concern for us as homeschoolers, and something that we need to be aware is on the agenda, is being talked about, and could be something that we face in our individual states and or provinces. This isn't content based, but just talking about rights and freedoms based. I don't know if anyone saw, I saw this little reel or video, which I saved so I can share the link for it afterwards. But this mom who was asking, am I overreacting? Because I went to school to pick up my kid because I had an appointment, and I was told that because I hadn't, pre-done this or pre-notified them within the window of what they had told me, I don't remember the exact circumstances or restrictions of that school, but basically she was told no, she was not allowed to. She would not be allowed to pick up her child. And she was like, wait a minute, they have an appointment. Like, I understand the system. I understand that it can be, distracting. I understand, but they have an appointment and I need to pull them out. And so at the end, she ended up going home without her child, and she was greatly concerned over the rights and freedoms that we're talking about, greatly concerned that in taking, we're not just talking even about the content, we're not just talking about standards, we're not just talking about a minimum amount of information or even skills-based, we're talking about a kind of control that we're ultimately looking for that is a lot more than that. That when we're talking abdicated our responsibility, that it is no longer our right. Essentially, it's not just that it's no longer our responsibility, it's that it's no longer our right. Our children are no longer our right, and discipling them and raising them in the way they should go is no longer our right. And I think that I see this ideology presented in this report, and that is what is concerning to me. And we know it's out there. We all face it all the time. We face this every day, but it is becoming more pervasive. And I will tell you, and I want to say promise you, but as homeschooling continues to grow and as the numbers continue to rise, there is a crisis that schools are facing. Schools, and by the way, colleges and universities are going to go through the same thing. Enrollment is going down. Schools are closing because parents are making this choice. And so there is going to be a backlash for this. There is a fear-based response of, we're losing control, we're losing access, we're losing jobs, we're losing this entire industry that has been built around education, and we need to take it back. Therefore, if we attack homeschooling, then we can start to see our numbers rise once again. And so I believe that this is only going to continue to rise. I think it's going to continue to grow. And this is the essential ideology behind this report that I read, at least. Number 4, there is a strong push, and ultimately where all of those concerns lead us to, a strong push for registration, oversight, and evaluation. It basically says that they believe there should be mandatory registration for all homeschoolers. There should be home inspections. Wow. Evaluations and assessments of learning outcomes, monitoring of curriculum and teaching methods, and ensuring that parents have minimum qualifications or teaching. All right, I don't even have a question for this. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? How does that one sit with you? How are you guys feeling about those things right now? Everything that I just said is like, okay. The minimum qualifications. I mean, I get this all the time as a curriculum writer, as a publisher, creator of content. It's huge, right? People want to know, what are your qualifications and what gives you the right to do this? Because only someone who has a really good education is someone who is essentially authorized to educate someone else. And I disagree. I fundamentally disagree with that. I don't even think that is, I would say some of the worst teachers that I've had in my life are overeducated. What even is education? You guys, we have to hit the rewind button entirely, because I would say that things are so incredibly broken that the words that we are using to define things no longer even mean the same thing. Education, as far as what you went to school and you memorized random bits of information that you'll never remember, and you passed some tests and you put in your time essentially to get a qualification on your wall, and then that is what says that you have the right to educate somebody's child. Whereas I, as their parent, who has spent their entire lives studying them, learning them, knowing them, and loving and caring about them, I am unqualified to teach them the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic. I really struggle with that. Even as a curriculum writer and a curriculum developer, I struggle with this concept, because I actually feel like I have had, first of all, and I've said this before, but I have hired people who have masters, doctorates, all sorts of different degrees to consult for some of our different units, because I felt like I needed to address this and be able to say, oh yeah, I had somebody that was doing our research or that was going over the content, and they researched everything. They don't remember. Why? Because they're actually not a human computer. They are not an encyclopedia. They have not memorized every word of their education that happened 10 or 20 years ago and can spit it back out. And things are changing and evolving so quickly that even some of the things they learned 20 years ago no longer apply. So again, we're talking about what even is education, because it's not just random bits of information. And like we talked about in our last week's episode, AI is changing everything. It is becoming the model. Their information is now able to be pulled and resourced and organized in such a way that really, why do we have to have this rote memorization of things as opposed to this deep experiential understanding, which in my mind is truly what education is. So I have thoughts and opinions, but I'm super interested to see what you guys are posting in the comments. My minimal qualification is that God placed these kids in my care on earth. Boom, Lacey. Kids learn so different. Can you imagine home visits? I feel like this will add to fear for people even having children. Degrees does not mean educated. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Qualification is such a skewed word. God gave me authority. You guys, you're hitting it. It's a big one, right? This is a big one. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why this comes up. And again, we've seen this happen with all sorts of different things. This is not the only area we've seen this happen, and it will continue to happen. There will be a lifelong cultural happenstance where people will take the one and they will try to create it or paint that picture around all of them. We all know about this. We all experience this. This is just welcome to our world and welcome to human nature. This is just what we do. So people take these really tragic cases that unfortunately do sometimes happen with homeschoolers. By the way, they also happen with non-homeschoolers. They also happen with kids who are in the school system. Kids in the school system are abused all the time. The difference is that in the school system, there are more eyes on these kids, and things, the argument is, can get caught earlier. The problem is that in some of these cases, these extreme cases of abuse and neglect that have happened in homeschool situations, they're so isolated that things sometimes aren't caught. And it is a horrifying and horrific thing. So what happens is, let's not at all say that there isn't, that kids don't have rights and that they don't need to be protected and that they aren't, that this isn't a real thing. It's a real thing that can happen anywhere, but it is a real thing. And what happens is that we take these cases and then we try to protect against the very small majority of things, like minority, that this can happen in. And we try to create an entire system that then limits everybody else who could be, of course, doing it very, very well. And so again, it's that age old, what is it? Adage, is that how you say it, of it's one person who ruins it for everybody. But it doesn't mean that that one person wasn't doing something that was atrocious. And so I just want to make sure that we hit on that. I am not saying where some of these things come from and the misconceptions about homeschooling come from is because let's just give the world a little bit of grace. Sometimes the only time they're hearing about homeschooling is those news stories. So they don't hear about anything. And then they hear about these off the wall news stories or these rare circumstances. And they think that that paints the pictures for all homeschoolers. And it's truly just ignorance, you guys. It's not that they are well educated on the subject. They truly don't know. I still encounter so many people that when I talk about homeschooling, I can tell they don't have an even framework for it. It's like they don't actually even know what that word means or what it is. So while it's a growing movement, there is still the large majority of our culture and our society that is completely blind to it. And so in their ignorance, they see just the one little bit, oh, I've heard about homeschooling and these are my concerns with it. Well, you're basing those concerns on the very small amount that you've seen in the media, which is trying to portray it a very specific way. But I do think it's important to give a little bit of grace for these people because they don't know any better. So it's a real thing. Okay. Here's some quotes from it based on some of these oversight requirements that they are proposing. States must implement oversight mechanisms such as registration and evaluation. Minimum standards serve as benchmarks of quality and must apply equally to homeschooling. Questions raised about whether parents should be required to have qualifications. So this is a big one that you need to be aware of in this report. All right, here is another point that there is. Let me make sure I don't have another question here. No, I don't. Concerns about isolation, socialization, I'm trying not to sneeze, and exposure to diversity. This one, okay, bear with me. So UNESCO warns that homeschooling may limit exposure to diverse viewpoints. You are only hearing from one person. Therefore, you aren't getting to hear from multiple diverse viewpoints. They warn that homeschooling may undermine citizenship development. I would love to see how they think that it would undermine citizenship development or how the public school system is doing better in that regard would be fascinating to me. And of course, you guys, we could not read a report about homeschooling without it. They believe that it restricts social development. Some key quotes: homeschooling may undermine important aspects of citizenship development. Children must have access to information and material from a diversity of sources. So here we go. Here's your question. Do you think homeschooling limits diversity? Let's hear your guys' response to this proposal in this report. Is it something that you feel like is happening? Do you feel like your kids are limited because you are kind of the one that is teaching information? Do you think from your own angle, are you only teaching one side? I mean, this is a core value of Gather Round. This is how we present information. We try to present both sides of the angle. We try to show from a more conservative biblical viewpoint versus from a more worldly standard. This is what the world says. This is what some say. This is what others say. We try to present both sides and then say, talk about it as a family. What do you think? I would argue that even if you felt like you were only approaching it from one angle, the school's doing no different. I can promise you that they are not teaching a biblical or conservative viewpoint in any way. They are teaching one viewpoint. They are teaching one direction. And so all that this report is ultimately saying is you should be teaching them this and this only. I would argue that I actually teach my kids a much more diverse viewpoint because we have the whole conversation to build a whole understanding. The Bible says, if you lack wisdom or lack understanding, get understanding. Like, you need to expand your understanding of a subject, which means knowing all sides of it, which means looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly and having a conversation. That's not happening in our schools. They're not having conversations about the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're having conversations with one agenda and with one voice and with one viewpoint. But what do you think? Let's not just hear from me. Let's hear from you. Let's see. We have to teach them the variety in order to interact with media and the public in a healthy way. That is true. Let's see. They want only the left side to be presented. I've got to open up my comments over here. Interesting. All right. I see we got someone online right now who has some opinions. The public school just gives one viewpoint. They are strict on how you do everything. My daughter gets real life experience of people, community, and plenty of socializing. I get to bring those real life experiences around to what God tells us. This is something God has shown me in the last 2 months. Isn't it amazing when you do that comparison? You want to talk about just socialization in general. The whole argument about socialization, I feel like, again, it's so ironic. Sometimes it's like I don't even know how to have the argument because I can't see how you can't see. So if I'm talking to a skeptic right now who is like, well, your kids aren't socialized, I just can't grasp that, because as a homeschool family, I can tell you that my kids are surrounded with a diverse age range. They are surrounded with brothers and sisters and parents. And not just that, we actually do leave our house. In fact, we probably leave our house more than you do as a public school family, because as opposed to just going to school world, which is very isolated and very undiverse, and then coming home where you are surrounded with people that are the exact same age as you, in the exact same circumstance, in the exact same region. Okay. That and that, home and school, that's your life, that's your world, with people that are exact same age as you. My kids are being exposed to all sorts of different things, because while your kids are at school, we're out exploring and doing things and seeing things and meeting people and volunteering over here. My kids are comfortable having a conversation with someone who is 80 years old. They can walk up to an adult and talk with them like they're on the same level. They don't have the same insecurities. They're very comfortable with multiple different ages. They can go up to a really little kid and have empathy, something that schools, they're bringing in. I remember my son, okay, homeschool family right here. My son, when he was a baby, he was part of a program called Roots of Empathy. And they were having so much problems with bullying that they decided, maybe if we can get kids when they're really young, like 5 and 6 years old, in kindergarten and grade 1, and we can bring a baby into the classroom where they're getting to see them grow and develop, maybe it will build empathy so that they'll see younger people with more grace and compassion, rather than seeing them as meat to be bullied, essentially. And so this was this whole initiative that my son was a part of. When he was a baby, we were heavily involved in the school as part of this Roots of Empathy program. And I would argue that bullying is an ongoing problem, that there is a lack of empathy, there is a lack of care, there's a lack of understanding toward anyone that is different, toward anyone that is younger, toward anyone that is in any of those senses. Whereas homeschool kids can go up to someone who is younger and have empathy. They can play with them. They can babysit them. I don't understand this whole socialization and diversity thing, because it's like people are blinded. It's like they can't see just how unsocialized the public school system is. Okay. There's my thoughts. I'm going to look into it. Let's see. Kids aren't even allowed to socialize at lunchtime in some places. My kids have friends of all ages because of homeschooling, because of your homeschool basketball organization. The public school pushes kids to stare at screens, learn from screens, and seek all knowledge from them. How's it socializing? Kim, I'm so glad you said that. Let's move on, because there are some more conversation points in here. Okay, so let's bring us to point number 6, children's rights in in this report are framed to potentially conflict with parental rights. So basically, we need to have state monitoring because kids have a right to access diverse information. So, not just your information, but what we say is diverse information. Let's make sure that we're putting that in there because, again, someone is deciding what is diverse enough to be called that. They have a right to socialization, they have a right to be heard, and of course, they have a right to be protected from violence. So, because of these things, they need to be state monitored because basically parents can't be trusted to hear their kids, to socialize their kids, and to give them a diverse education. Point number 7, homeschool motivations are complex, but UNESCO says that there are risks. So here's the reasons that people homeschool that they list in this report. They can homeschool for religious reasons, dissatisfaction with school quality, safety concerns, bullying, disabilities, racial injustice, nomadic lifestyles. But they say it can also be that parents basically resist public values, not public school values, public values. These are the values of the world, and you are resisting the values of the world. And some withdraw children to hide abuse or avoid oversight. I believe you are talking about a once in a lifetime thing that, yes, does happen, but I'm shocked that that is thrown in there as a reason that people are choosing to homeschool their kids because that is so grossly unfair. And we could take all of those stats and compare them with the public school system and come up with an equal, if not rising number of those. So regardless of that, what are the reasons that you chose to homeschool? Boom, new question popping in on the screen. Let's hear from you guys. Do you fit in with one of these? Are you doing it for religious reasons? Are you doing it because you're dissatisfied with school quality, because of safety concerns, bullying, disabilities, racial injustice, nomadic lifestyle? Or do you resist the values of the public? What a fascinating thing to put in there. All right, I'm going to let you guys comment on that while I continue, and I will come back to that and read some of your comments. We're almost at the end. You have done so well. So here's another thing that's in the report, and this is kind of going into what Kim was mentioning, which is super. I had to do some more research and digging into this because I, again, could not wrap my head around it. UNESCO warns that digital homeschooling increases inequality. They repeatedly link basically digital tools, tech commercialization, and privatization as potential problems for homeschoolers. I was like, what are we talking about here? So I have to pull up another screen because I had to do some more research to figure out what on earth they're saying and read a little bit closer. I have to find it. Okay. I have like so many screens. Here we go. So essentially, what I think they're saying is that there is a rise of, because homeschoolers are more isolated and because they have less available to them, they use more technology than the school system. Let's go back to point number 1, UNESCO. Let's go back to that very first point and the fact that maybe you don't have all the data because I think that the public school system, especially with even when we talked about last week, there are whole schools that are having AI teachers, that are having AI tutors, that are having AI classrooms. So I really all the way back in my day, all right, school was often turning on a documentary or a show and pushing play. I think that's shocking, absolutely shocking that you would say that homeschoolers, who, by the way, a public school child is at school for 6 to 8 hours of their day, and a chunk of that is definitely on technology. And then they come home and have all this homework, and they're usually given, school computers or resources, and they're expected to do those things online using online or digital tools. So you're talking about all their homework in the evening and all of their daytime, which is all basically based, and a lot of it based on online digital shows, media, whatever it may be. And you're talking about comparing that with homeschoolers who often can condense that same amount of education, actually more and probably delivered better, into a shorter period of time. Even if we use tech for the entire time of that, it's still probably going to be less than what's happening over in the public school world. But anyways, So basically, they're saying because there's more isolation, because they don't have as much resources as we do in the school system, then they have to rely on technology more. And what happens when they rely on technology more is that some families can afford more tools, and so they can sign up for more subscriptions, whereas other families can't afford to sign up for as many subscriptions. And so now we have inequality issues with the fact that some are getting a better education because they can afford it, while others are getting a poorer education because they can't afford the digital resources that they need. To me, this just shows how out of touch this report is with homeschooling in general. It's a crazy point to include. I don't think it's relevant in any way. But here we go. Here's your question. Does homeschooling with tech actually isolate kids? How do you feel about this point? Am I totally alone in this? Because, yeah, I've talked enough about this point. Okay. I'm going to let you guys respond. I got to get back to where I was. I'm lost. Here we go. All right, we're on the last point. All right, I still see why you guys are homeschooling in the comments. I love it. I would venture to say homeschool kids are having their screen time monitored much more because of our level of involvement. Absolutely. And of course, there are always going to be those cases where, yeah, there probably are parents out there that it's all iPad and they're hit and play and it's something. So I'm sure that it does happen, but I do not think that that is the paintbrush that we can use to absolutely paint even a majority of homeschoolers. And again, even if that were the case, even if we were doing all online or remote learning where everything is based on watching a teacher, I'm not really sure how it's super different to watch a teacher versus watching a teacher in a classroom. I don't think that they're getting a personalized education by having a teacher teach them in a classroom. They're still stuck to their synopsis and what they're talking about. It's not like they're having that one-on-one in a way that we could as homeschool families. Even if that is the case and it is all tech, I still am not fully seeing it. I think they kind of go into as well the fact that there's more privatization. So because of this growing market, anyone can just do it. And so again, they loop it back into this is why we need to have more oversight. And this is why we need to have someone deciding the content and the curriculum, because anyone can just Rebecca can just go, this uneducated person who's never had a day of university in her life. She can just go and create curriculum, and homeschool families use that. And so because she's uneducated, they're uneducated. And so we need to control this more. So no matter how we kind of look at it, that's how they're kind of trying to spin it. And that's where it's ultimately coming from. And so it's important to understand the line of thinking, I think, so that we can A, be prepared to give an answer, and B, understand and be able to think through these things. And you know what? If you haven't processed through some of these questions or things for yourself, you probably should. That's my kid. Aw, she's using her tech to call me, guys. You probably should. These are the kind of things that we want to be able to be like, I've thought through these, I've processed through these. How much tech am I comfortable with? What do I feel like I am comfortable with? Am I comfortable using a curriculum from someone who doesn't have a university degree? What is education? What does education mean to me? What do I think makes a great education? Am I looking for the most educated? Am I looking for the most knowledge? Or am I looking for the experience that is, am I going off of success or am I going off of a process and a system? You have to ask yourself these questions, because if you're not going to ask yourself these questions, someone else is going to ask you these questions. They're going to ask your kids these questions, and you're going to feel, we talked about even last week when we're dealing with shame or guilt or doubt, those doubts come up when we haven't taken the time to really assess and think about and pray about these things for ourselves, so that we are even prepared to give an answer when we face trials, when we face tribulations, and when we face doubt, even from ourselves, self-doubt. Okay, here is our last one. So they highlight legal trends. So they go into many different countries. So again, this is actually not just something that is the United States approach. This is worldwide. So they talk about the fact that there are examples of countries that, because of the growing trend of homeschooling, are controlling, micromanaging, or even shutting down homeschooling in those areas. pointing it as a reason that obviously these forward-thinking countries are actually aware of the problem and doing something about it, and the rest of the world needs to be thinking these same things. So they give the example of France, which now requires authorization, not just notification. You don't just give a letter of intent. They must authorize and decide that you are authorized to teach your kids. Of course, you guys know that Germany has pretty much banned homeschooling entirely, except for in rare cases. And then they promote things like South Africa or Portugal or the Philippines or Switzerland, which have structured oversight systems, and argue that there needs to be more of a standard of oversight for countries like Canada or the United States or other countries in the world. So, all right, I have another question for you guys, and then I'm just going to open it up for conversation and wrap this up because this has been quite the meeting. All right, here we go. Would you accept a simple homeschool register if it stopped there, or would you be concerned that it wouldn't stop there? So for those of you that aren't required to register, you're not required to give a letter of intent. And I know a lot of you guys are, but if you aren't, would this be seen as like more of an oversight where you're like, it's just a slippery slope? Or are you like, yeah, I think that we should be able to say, these are the ones that are homeschooling, and see those numbers grow and rise, and let somebody, the government, the state, know these are the people that are homeschooling their kids. What are your thoughts on that? It would probably not stop there. Let's see. I love your guys' comments. Oh man, I'm waiting to see if you guys have anything on Facebook and YouTube. They will just require more later. It is a slippery slope. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I live in a place where we are required to do a letter of intent. And even where I lived before in Canada, we were required to basically notify or to register at least that we were homeschooling. And so it was definitely documented, both where I was in Canada and where I am now. But I think that the more they know, then yes, I think that this idea, I believe that this ideology is pervasive in most of the world, in most of the general culture that we live in today, and in politics. And I think that every little right we give away, it will be taken and then some. It'll be like, you know, you'll give an inch and they'll take a mile. That's what I feel like is the picture of homeschooling. And so while most places I think are required to give a letter of intent, this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to be partnering with organizations like HSLDA, paying a simple membership fee, but helping to support them to fight for our homeschool freedoms, because it is a fight. If we just passively sit and watch what happens on the news and do nothing and say nothing, thinking I'm not a part of the problem, then we're also not a part of the solution. We're not a part of the fight at all. And in the same way that I would say some of our ancestors abdicated the right to education and the responsibility of education, I would say that in a way it is abdicating the fight. And by abdicating the fight, we are abdicating it not necessarily for our own kids. Maybe this won't happen in our own kids' lifetimes, but in the lifetime of our grandkids, you better believe that this is the fight that they will be facing. And the ground that we lose now is ground that's going to be lost for them. And so I do think this is important. I do think that investing in, you know, HSLDA, I spoke once and I think I was keynoting together with, or there was a session at least at one of the things that I was in where I spoke back to back with somebody who was with the HSLDA. And I went up, and you guys know me, I'm all like, homeschool freedom, you know, less is more, arbitrary lines and standards, and like follow peace, and like what is really, you know, education anyways, and focusing on the things that truly matter, and seek first his kingdom, and all these things will be added. I mean, you guys know me. And so I'm preaching all of this stuff. And afterwards, he came up and was like, I could just tell there was a shift, and that not that what I said conflicted with what he was saying, but my perspective toward it, though I believe is true and is accurate and is right, obviously, that's why I talk the way I talk and believe what I believe, that it could be damaging. Because when he got up, he was talking like, we must, report. We must do the things that are required by our states. We must do the minimum things. We must make sure that we are painting a good picture, that we are setting a good standard, that we are proving not just that homeschooling, I mean, yes, homeschool for all of these reasons, but that we are proving that homeschooling is actually better, because otherwise it's so difficult to defend the case if this is kind of the overall pervasive message of homeschooling. And I understood what he was saying, and I understood how we as homeschoolers probably need to be careful that, yes, I believe all those things are true, but I also believe that the Bible says to give to Caesar what is due to Caesar. I think that, as far as if you're required to give a letter of intent, give a letter of intent. If you are required to give attendance, give attendance. I think get creative. Get as creative as you possibly can, where you are able to paint your full picture of your homeschool life. If you're required to do a certain number of hours, then do that amount of hours. But remember that baking and chores and life skills experiences all count towards that. Volunteering over here and doing this over there, those things all count towards your education. So I think that we can get really creative with how we do it and see education in a different light, but still be prepared to give an answer and still be doing the best we can with what we have been given, and paving the way for really the next generation of homeschoolers behind us. And I think it's just important to, like I said, be aware so that we can give an answer and be prepared for what is coming, and be supporting these organizations that are standing on the front lines for our behalf and for the behalf of our kids. Okay, what other questions do I have? I think I have another one. All right, let's end with this one. What is the biblical approach to this report? All right, we've talked about all of this stuff, and I guess the go-to for a lot of people is probably a fear-based response. This stuff is scary. When we're talking about, like, they're advocating for home visits. You want to come and see if my home is a learning environment. I think that's a major overstep, and I think that it is natural to feel a little tightening and a little bit of concern. I think we have to choose what to do with that. And I do think that that is important. I think that we don't want to be making decisions based out of fear. We want to do what is right for our families. We want to do what is right for our children. And so I think that it is critical that when you read these things, that we aren't responding out of anger. Like I said, that we have grace and compassion, recognizing that most people are truly ignorant to what homeschooling is, to what it looks like. And their only picture of it is the little pieces of horror that they see pop up on the news. And so I think there needs to be a grace-based approach. I think that when we go loud and screaming and angry at stuff like this, I think that it, again, just doesn't paint the picture very well. And I think that we need to be able to see the bigger picture of this too. We need to help educate people. We need to help show people with grace and compassion. And I think that we need to not, like I said, be making decisions based on fear, not letting this get to us to a point where we feel like this is the direction the homeschooling is going. So, I need to move, or I need to do this, or I need to do that, or I don't know if I can do this. Not making those decisions based on fear, and instead following the piece of what God has called you to do, because he goes before us and he fights our battles. You are not alone in this. So we can do the best that we can, and we can react with grace and with love and with compassion, but we can also stand firm and fight the fight, because you are in a fight, and the fight is worthy. It is a fight for your children. It is a fight for their education. It's a fight for your freedoms. It's a fight for biblical truth. It's a fight for truth. It's a fight for what is right, and to disciple and to raise our kids. And this matters. And it is worth your time, and it is worth your investment, and it is worth you taking a stand. Don't abdicate the stand. You don't necessarily have to be on the front lines. All right. You don't have to go into protests and whatever else, but don't abdicate the stand. Take a stand. And I just believe that God is going to do a movement in homeschooling. I believe it will be blessed. I believe it will continue to grow. I believe that we are seeing, like I said, a fear-based approach from the world, and I think that will continue. I think there will be more and more of a panic as the numbers continue to rise. I think we'll keep seeing that. And yes, there's going to be this panicked at the end, but the reality is that if we stand strong, I think we will see this continue to rise to the point where it's not going to be a minimal movement in society. I think that this is going to be a really viable choice for families. And so I just encourage you guys just to keep standing and to keep fighting and to keep persevering. And yeah, you're not alone. All right. That's it. That is all the stuff that I have. There is so much that we could say about this. We could go on and on and on, but I think it's important. I think it's worth, talking about. And I hope that you guys continue the conversation. You have the link to the report, open it up, download it, read it to your kids, talk with them about some of these things. Our own kids' view of homeschooling matters because they're going to be the next generation that is either going to pick up the baton and continue the movement or is going to reject it. And so let them see this. Let them start to see, we even talk as a family, we compare, we look at the world, we look at public school, we compare, we contrast the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't be afraid to have a conversation about the good, the bad, and the ugly because it exists in public school and it exists in homeschool. Let's be honest and let's be real, have the real picture and understanding, and then be able to see how it fits with our lives and our kids. And yeah, just have the conversation, guys, because it's so fun. All right. Well, that is all I have. Thank you so much for joining. I will not be going live next week. I'm going to be out of town with some of my staff, but I will be back again the week after. So I hope to see you guys then. And don't forget, if you have not checked it out, we have for the Online Academy Christmas School that is starting December 1st. And we have a new teacher for it, Miss Bree, who is one of our staff members we're really excited about. There's going to be crafts, there's going to be gift wrapping competitions, it's going to be devotionals, there's recitation, there's stories. I think it's just going to be a lot of fun and maybe take some of the pressure off of you. So if you're feeling a little burned out this time of year, check it out. You can join just for the month, just do that one unit and then hop back in with your regular school in January, whether you use Gather Round or not. So go check it out, gatherroundhomeschool.com/academy. Is it academy or online academy? I think it's academy. And otherwise, I hope you guys have an amazing Thanksgiving, and we will see you all again in 2 weeks. Bye.